You regret the things you don't do in life more than the things you do. I was almost 50 with a 9-year-old daughter. My life was good. I owned my own home. I had a great job. And yet I yearned for adventure, different challenges. I wanted to learn and experience new things. I found that same old, so comforting, but stifling. I had this dream to travel around the world for so many years, but got caught up in the trap of accumulation, working my way up the corporate ladder, and quite frankly, living my best life. But when I was 50, if I didn't go now, when would I go? There were so many reasons I couldn't fulfill this dream. I had a 9-year-old daughter. I was single. I didn't have a rich daddy. I never won the lotto. I didn't have good savings. Yet one thing I'd learned in life is never to argue for my limitations. And one day I was sitting on my brown leather lounge suite and I wondered, would I get the same satisfaction from sitting on this lounge suite every single day for a year? Or would I get more satisfaction from waking up and having breakfast on the Galapagos? I looked at myself in the mirror and I wondered, could I be a 50-year-old woman who owns nothing? Could I swap the safety of my home, the security of my job, and just head out into the unknown? I decided I was that woman who wasn't tied down by her possessions and the weight of other people's expectations. I decided I would take risks to make my dreams come true. And so I did what any rational 50-year-old would do. I sold everything I possessed, every stick of furniture, the house we were living in, the bond I'd been paying for 20 years, the clothes off my back, until I was left with nothing but a small pile of money and a backpack. Oh, and a derelict house in the Eastern Cape that nobody would buy. Oh my mother was horrified. My financial advisor said, "You are fiscally irresponsible." Hell, I can hear you all thinking, she's brave, but she must be absolutely crazy. But yet, the more I sold, gave away, and threw away, the lighter I felt. I woke up every day excited to be alive. I felt like I was on fire. And then the day arrived. Indigo and I embarked on an epic 366-day around the world trip. This was absolutely life-changing. And people ask me, did you regret it? And I can tell you with all honesty, I have never regretted selling everything, not even for a single moment. In fact, in a heartbeat, I would turn around that clock and do it all over again. I'm going to share some of my trip with you. Let me just get my PowerPoint up. Basically, this is the trip we did for a year and a day. Started at Johannesburg and went across to Florida. We started off in Disney because that was every 9-year-old's dream. Went up to New York City, spent an amazing 3 weeks, took the train to Toronto, drove to Thunder Bay, spent some time with friends in Seattle, San Francisco, what a great city. And then we headed out into the unknown. We didn't know a single person. We didn't know the language. So we started in Ecuador, in Quito, and we went to Spanish language school. Luckily for me, Indigo picked it up very quickly. And most of the trip I had to say, speak to the child, don't speak to me. But from there, we went to the Galapagos Islands for 3 weeks. Absolutely beautiful. And we did a deep Amazon trip. Terrifying. From there, we went to Peru. You'll see we spent a lot of time exploring Peru. And from there to my most favorite place in the world, Easter Island, the most isolated, inhabited place in the world. From Easter Island, we touched down briefly in Chile. Argentina, we went from the Iguazu Falls, the Devil's Throat, right down to the ice fields. Oh my goodness. And then we did this dreadful flight from South America to Doha to Asia, 36 hours. I will never do that again. Then we spent time in Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So our philosophy was travel light, live light, spread the light, be the light. My backpack for the entire year weighed 12 kilograms, including my electronics and cosmetics. Indigo's weighed 8. And one really good thing is every time she wanted to buy something, I would say, sure, buy it, but you've got to carry it. And very quickly, she lost her desire for buying stuff. This was our luggage for the whole year. Here's Indigo. You can see a pretty seasoned traveler by now. There was a backpack, my backpack, handbag, and then like a little stroller bag. And this was in Ecuador. The taxi driver dropped us at a host family. And the taxi driver and the host family had this big panic discussion because they thought our luggage had been stolen. And I tried to explain to them, this is it. This is what we have for the whole year. And it is an amazing feeling to have everything you own in one backpack. And at any time, you can just pack up and leave. So this is Indigo in Cusco with everything she needed for the year. I had one pair of longs, one skirt, one pair of shorts, and everything was in pink or purple because that's how I rolled. And when we were in America, we went to Disney and we were standing in the Harry Potter queue for 2 hours. And the lady next door to me, an American, admired my outfit because it was bright. And I explained to her that I only had 3 outfits. And you know, in the land of plenty, this was big news. And she told everybody in the queue. And soon we spoke to everybody and had this whole discussion. And one thing that I found that when I went shopping in America, if I go to Walmart, for instance, and I wanted to buy a white t-shirt, you know, if I go to Woolworths or Truworths, there might be 3 t-shirts to choose from. In America, there were 63. And I found that I just became paralyzed with choice. There was so much choice that I would land up not buying anything. We also traveled light by staying with families. We didn't stay in backpackers because not appropriate for a 9-year-old child in a backpackers. We didn't stay in fancy hotels because hotels around the world are all the same. So we stayed with local families, and I specifically chose ones that had children where we could. And often we stayed in the equivalent of our townships. So it was quite a culture shock for us, for both of us, especially for Indigo. And one thing I do know is that she learned to appreciate stuff. When we twice stayed in nice places, once when our flight was delayed and the airlines put us up, and it was absolute luxury. And for her 10th birthday, she could choose a hotel. But everywhere we went, we stayed with locals, which made such a difference because you would sit around and have dinner with them and their friends, and we'd have these discussions using Google, broken Spanish, broken English. And I found an amazing thing is around the world, there's always the same discussions. Number one, everybody is tired of the corruption in their own government. It doesn't matter if it's South America or Asia, there is corruption and people hate it. Number two, everybody is concerned about the economic future in an increasingly unstable world. And number three was we all want our children to have better lives than we had. So it was amazing to stay with families because we were safe. They would walk with us to the local markets. We would walk with them to school, and we got a much different feel of the country than staying in a hotel. My traveling light, I was ruthless. We were going up to Machu Picchu in Peru, up in the mountains, and so I threw my costume away. We stayed for 10 days in Angus Caliente, which is the village at the bottom of Machu Picchu, and we went up early one morning to see the sunrise, and we went up one afternoon to see the sunset, and once in the middle of the day. But at the bottom of the village, we discovered these amazing hot water pools, natural streams. And of course, I didn't have a costume because I'd given it away. And there was an enterprising Peruvian soul who was renting out swimming costumes. And the thought of wearing a costume that 400 people had worn before me and was damp was absolutely terrible. But it was either that or miss out on the experience. And so I confess I rented a costume and absolutely loved this hot water pool deep in the jungle. What a beautiful experience. So traveling also teaches you to get over yourself. We owe at least this much to the future generations from whom we have borrowed a fragile planet called Earth. We went to very far-flung places, and it is heartbreaking to see the damage we are doing to our planet. I know we hear it all the time on the news, global warming, waste, rubbish, but to actually see it is very distressing. We spent 3 weeks on the Galapagos Islands, and honestly, it felt like being in a David Attenborough movie. It is just like that. And coming from the African savanna to this volcanic rock where all the animals are different, great experience. Indigo actually learned to snorkel while we were looking for blue-footed boobies. What a great way to learn a new skill. And there are not hundreds of iguanas, there are thousands of iguanas everywhere you go. And some of them are 2 meters long. And one thing I didn't realize is that they swim. And the first time we were in the sea and this 2-foot iguana came surfing past us, we both nearly had a heart attack and were out that water in seconds. Of course, the Galapagos is all around the giant tortoises, and they are massive. This is Indigo at 9 years old, and you can see it is about 3 times her size. And they are very habituated to humans. They don't even worry if you're right next to them. But the thing that broke my heart is that there is not a single tortoise born in the wild in the Galapagos anymore. And the reason is that the rats come off the tourist ships onto shore, they swim, and they eat all the tortoise eggs. So currently there's a race between the locals and the rats. The locals go and collect all the eggs and take them to Isabella, one of the islands, put them in incubators, and then release them back onto the island when they're big enough. And that's the hard thing about conscientious traveling, is you go to see the tortoises, but the very fact of you being a tourist is what is bringing damage to the tortoises. So it's this hard balance of trying to have a light tread on the earth, but actually you're part of the damage. Easter Island, where those huge heads, the moai, stand with their backs to the sea. What a fascinating place. There were about 1,000 of these statues built all around the island. It took them 800 or 900 years. And there are about 100,000 visitors a year that go to Easter Island. But this is a tiny island. It's 11 kilometers across and 26 kilometers wide, volcanic. There's no natural source of water. There's no streams. The only water they have is water that collects in the volcanic craters. And the problem is tourists come to this island and they want bottled water. They want wine, they want lobsters, they want fresh lettuce. So everything is brought from Chile or from Peru at a huge cost. And then they deal with this mountain of rubbish that they can't get rid of, recycle. So the pressure of tourism on these places is massive. And once again, we stayed outside the local city on a little farm and try to tread lightly, but you can see the impact of tourists. They come in these huge cruise ships and 2,000 of them get off in a day. And when they get back on the ship at night, you can just hear the whole island breathe a sigh of relief. But also they're having so many problems. They're in the Pacific Ocean, and those huge waste islands sometimes wash up, and there are just kilometers of rubbish washing up onto their beaches. very sad. We went hiking on a glacier, and we went, this is in Argentina, the Perita Marina Glacier. And once again, this is a disappearing feature. While you're standing there, we had a picnic lunch, pieces of this glacier just break off continually. And one thing I didn't realize is it sounds a bit like a gunshot. They break off with such a sound and they smash into the ground. The picture of me with a piece of ice is, we had a whiskey at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we had to go and chip our own ice off, and had whiskey with ice that was 800 or 1,000 years old. The best whiskey I've ever had in my life, especially in the morning. But I wonder, when my daughter, if she travels in 10 years' time, will there be any glaciers left for her to see? The rate that they're melting is terrifying. And this is Machu Picchu. They have about 2,500 visitors a day. This is massive. And you get this thing called cumulative damage. Every time somebody brushes against a stone or kicks a stone off the path or breaks off a plant, all this damage accumulates. But their biggest problem is plastic water bottles. Everyone goes up the mountain, drinks their plastic, they're supposed to carry it down, and they don't. And they have this massive amount of mountains of plastic, which they have to get down this mountain. There's not even a road at the bottom. It has to go by train. And so once again, the volume of tourism just caused so many problems in this isolated spot. This picture with my daughter, there was a group of Peruvian school kids, Indians, who had never ever seen a white child. They were fascinated by indigo. And the teacher asked me if they could take a photograph. And I was like, sure, thinking her and the class, they wanted to do it one by one by one. It took about 35 minutes for everyone to have a photograph. And I think in the beginning she felt like Madonna, but very quickly got bored of the whole thing. If you reject the food, ignore the customs, fear the religion, and avoid the people, you might better stay at home. So our philosophy around travel was to spend our money on experiences and not on things. And hey, most of them are made in China in any case. So we did so many experiences. Every country we were in, we did everything that was on offer. This is us hiking on the glacier. What an amazing experience. And I didn't know, but the ice creaks and groans and shifts. And it's this weird blue color, absolutely fascinating. This is a picture of my daughter in the Amazon jungle. I'm glad I've been there, and I can tell you I will never, ever go there again. It is so hot. It is humid. The creepy crawlies are bigger than your head, cockroaches as big as your hands, tarantulas. Everything is poisonous. Everything is dangerous. We did a deep Amazon. We flew for 4 hours in a little plane, then went on the Amazon, which is so wide, you can barely see the horizon, then in a motorboat, then in a dugout, and got to this little place with no electricity. And I thought, well, if something goes wrong, that's it, we're tickets. And our guide took us out every day into the jungle until eventually I said to him, I can't bear it. It's so thick. You cannot see half a meter in front of you. And so we went out on the boat every day. And my daughter caught a piranha, which was like the pinnacle of her life. Such excitement to actually catch a piranha. And they have these big fire ants, honestly, as long as your thumb. And the guide said to us, they won't kill you, but if they bite you, you'd wish you were dead because it's so sore. Once again, Indigo didn't go to school when we were traveling. So what we did is we swapped the classroom for the world. And we went to every single natural history museum, every art museum, every course we could go on. Here we are, we biked over the San Francisco Bridge. Not very fit. We went on a tandem. It was great fun. In Argentina, obviously, we went for tango lessons. Absolutely beautiful, elegant. And on Sunday, all the parks all over Argentina, there are just people dancing. Such an elegant nation. In Canada, we went canoeing up looking for the loons, because I definitely wanted to hear a loon, and we wanted to see bears. And so depressing. The only bears we saw were at the local rubbish dump where they come to forage. And you have this vision of beautiful bears in the countryside. No, you go to the rubbish dump to see them. Cambodia. It is one of those countries that is so fascinating. These are those temples that got forgotten for thousands of years, and the trees have just grown all over them. And it led to such interesting discussions about how do you forget about a temple for 1,000 years, and how nature absolutely always takes over and wins in the end. Traveling with a 9-year-old daughter was difficult because she didn't like any of the local food. She didn't want to try stuff. She didn't want to taste stuff because it was so foreign. And I refused to travel and eat a pizza or a McDonald's. So often we'd have a 2-tier lunch. I would go and get her a pizza, and then I would go and have local food. But then I discovered that you can do cooking courses. And the amazing thing about the cooking courses is you go to the local market and you shop and you buy all your ingredients, and then you come back and make it. And I discovered that Indigo would eat the food if she had shopped and made it. So every single place we went to, we went on cooking courses. We were on the Mekong Delta, and we went up on a little boat, and we stopped at this, I guess, equivalent of a shack. And the lady taught Indigo to make rice paper. Now, we would never make this in South Africa. You can't get the ingredients, but such an interesting experience to see how they make it with very makeshift stuff. This picture is in Vietnam, in the Gucci tunnels, where the Vietnamese were hiding from the Americans during the war. And Indigo, at 9 years old, could barely fit in these tunnels where the men, women, and children hid. I didn't even try to go in. I'm claustrophobic, and these tunnels are tiny. But it just shows how survivable and adaptable people are, that they will actually live in tunnels to save their lives. It was quite an interesting experience in Vietnam because there's quite a lot of anti-American sentiment. And often people would say to us, "Go away, Americans." And we would say, "We're a South African." And that would open a whole conversation. But also very third world country. They've everyone advanced since the Second World War, but they seem to have got stuck. They're like 50 years behind the rest of the world. When we were in Thailand, we went for Tai Chi lessons. This was such hard work. We had to be up at 4 o'clock every morning and do it for 2 hours, and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon again for 2 hours. And it's something on my list back in Cape Town is to do again, because it's this beautiful mixture of movement, a bit like yoga. We didn't have too much spirituality around it because the language was difficult. But every single morning, this guy would choose a different part in the forest or on the beach, and it really felt like we were part of the landscape. In Lima, Peru, we went paragliding off the cliffs of Lima. An exciting experience. You run off the cliff into the sea, and then you circle around and you come back through all the high-rise buildings, and you can see people in their office and they're looking at you and you looking at them. But this was the only time on the trip that actually I was afraid. And it wasn't because of the flying. It was because Indigo went first and I stayed on the ground. And then I had to leave her on the ground when it was my turn. And I thought, she's 9 years old. She can't speak the language. We don't know a single person in the entire city. What happens if something goes wrong? And traveling with a child, it's this whole balance of adventure and safety. So we had a lot of safety things in place. We would always land at a place in the morning and have our first night's accommodation booked. And generally, even the first week, we'd always stay with a family. Whenever we left, we would have a card, a business card in both of our pockets, in our handbags, with the name of the people we're staying with. They would have my sister's contact details in South Africa. So we try to mitigate any problems that would happen. And of course, we had taken out a full travel insurance, and touch wood, we never once had to use it for medical or any reasons. And I think it was because we planned quite well. We also tended not to stay in the cities. We stayed just outside the cities, where I think it is always safer. And because we stayed with the local families, they tend to embrace you and keep you safe. But the food, I mean, I am assuming you've all traveled and you know food in different countries is just so alien. This fish was caught in the Mekong Delta, but these people live on the river and they're on their boats, and on one side of the boat, they do all their daily ablutions, and then on the other side of the boat, they're fishing. And I'm kind of like, oh, so they caught this fish for us, specially. They don't even clean it. They don't gut it. They just deep fry the whole thing. And then they give it to you on like the stand with chopsticks. And you can't insult your host, actually. So Indigo absolutely refused. Once I managed to peel off some of the skin, it was actually delicious. But the thought of the fact that they're doing their ablutions and they're washing and eating from the same water. But as they say, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. This was in Vietnam, the snake wine. Our guide told us if I drink this wine that I will never get sick in my life again. There were 20 different kinds of snakes in this wine. So of course I was up for it and I drank a cup of snake wine. It didn't taste too bad. It tasted more like whiskey. But this disgusting thing of picking snake scales off your tongue afterwards is something I don't ever want to do again. But I've never been sick since then, so maybe it works. And the markets around the world, either beautiful or horrific. I come from shopping in Woolworths, in an air-conditioned Woolworths where everything is beautifully packed. And you go to these markets, and first of all, they stink. There is blood everywhere. There are flies everywhere. They are the most disgusting things you can see. But that's the beauty of travel, because you start to understand that not everyone has fridges. Not everyone has all the sophisticated stuff. And in Asia and in South America, the animal is sold, slaughtered, and eaten the same day, and they waste absolutely nothing. And in fact, the more I understood how their worlds lived, the more I had empathy for them. And instead of looking at stuff with this disgust, I looked at them and I understood that they don't waste. If you're poor people, you will eat the lips and the cheeks of I think these were donkeys in South America. And you understand they don't have fridges. They don't have beautiful abattoirs where they can drain the blood out. So even though I probably wouldn't have been that keen to try one of these meals, I did learn to not be so South African about everything and wish that I was in a Woolies, and I could walk through the market and understand that it is different from our lives. But sometimes, like this bread that is sold in Peru, beautiful flowers and everything is gorgeous. And that's the whole thing of travel. There are things that amaze you, there are things that disgust you, but there are things, everything moves you to a new level of understanding. And of course, there's all the different colors and customs and beauty of the world. Geelong Bay, we went on a Chinese junk for 3 days through those limestone mountains. There are about 998 of them. So beautiful. You feel like you're living in a movie. And we went to some of the dragon festivals, and we went for massages, and we went to puppet shows. We absolutely did so much. Our days were full from the morning until night. We didn't go out very often at night because I'm not going to go to a pub or a nightclub with a 9-year-old daughter. So we did all our stuff in the day, and in the evenings we would catch up with Facebook and photographs and writing to people. We also didn't have an agenda, so we did very slow travel. We would stay in a place for a minimum of a week, at least 7 days, and from there I would plan the next part of the trip and the next part of the trip. So we had bought a round the world ticket, which meant we just had to keep going in the same direction. And effectively we followed the sun when we went. This is one of my favorite pictures of our travel. This is in Lake Titicaca, which is one of the highest lakes in the world. And there is an island there where the men do the knitting and the women work in the fields. And we walked up, I don't know, maybe 50 steps. It's breathless. It's so high, you can't breathe. And we sat next to this beautiful old man who was knitting. And even though we couldn't speak to him, it just felt like we had a human connection. It was absolutely lovely. And then our guide came and he interpreted. This guy was 50, the same age as me. It was astonishing how different our lives were, how experiences were, and just that juxtaposition of youth and age to me was beautiful. And another thing on this island is if you're going to get married, the whole island gets together and they vote if they think you'll have a good marriage or not. You don't just decide, I'm in love with this person, I'm going to marry them. The village decides you'll make a good couple or not. And after 3 years, they meet again and decide if you should split or if you should continue. And I found that quite interesting. And maybe it would be something would be worthwhile in our worlds to get more than just one person deciding if you should get married. This was in Cambodia, a Buddhist monk who was doing blessings. And I guess that's one thing about travel is you start to understand that there are hundreds of gods, and there's not one God that's better than or different to another God. Everyone treats their own God with reverence, and they follow their own traditions that they believe in. And once again, I discovered that this lady monk was the same age as me, but she was tiny. She came like right underneath my elbow. And our lives are so different. We're on the same planet, but I grew up in South Africa, going to university, learning technology, working on computers. She grew up in the rice fields. Very, very different. You know, I guess like everything, all good things come to an end. And my dad got really sick and had to have a 12-hour brain operation. We were still going to continue traveling, but we decided to come home. I'm just going to share some of our next adventure with you as well. I had owned a house in New Bethesda in the Eastern Cape, completely derelict house. I don't know if anyone knows New Bethesda. It's between Graaff-Reinet and Middelburg in the Eastern Cape. This tiny little hamlet in the Sneeuwberg Mountains, famous for Helen Martin. And I bought a house there. I think I'd owned it for about 8 years. I bought it really cheap, but it had no bathrooms, no running water, no kitchen. And the year we got there, when we got back from our travels in July, I had no house in Cape Town and we had to go to New Bethesda. It was bitterly cold, minus 15 degrees that year. You cannot believe how cold it was. I had this house, didn't have a bathroom, didn't have running water, didn't have a kitchen. But because it was my only asset left, I had to start fixing it. And we used local laborers, like farm workers. This is their scaffolding. The walls were made of mud bricks that had been packed. It was 138 years old, this house. And I have a friend who's an artist who lives in New Bethesda. And I was complaining about the work not being so great. And she said to me, one thing you've got to learn in the country is if at first you don't succeed or you're not satisfied, lower your standards. So that was something I had to learn living in the country. But everything was a disaster, and it stood empty for about 20 years. The wiring had collapsed. The ceilings had collapsed. The rain just poured through the walls. You can see the floorboards were all lifting. And all of the ceilings were painted this dark color. And I found out that they painted it with ostrich blood. And this horrified me. So immediately I just painted everything white. And you have so many different adventures living in small villages. My neighbor asked me if I'd babysit his pig called Derek. And he came one day with this monstrous pig. And can you see what he did to my garden in the first day? He just made it into a mud pit. But at the same time, my other neighbor's busy making cupboards for my kitchen. And everyone just coexists and gets along. And because I had to make a living, I decided I would open a coffee shop. Because New Bethesda has around 15,000 visitors a year, and everybody needs good coffee. And so we officially opened a coffee shop called the Ibis Lounge. This is my daughter. This was a lady actually who used to work for me in Cape Town, and I phoned her and she came all the way up to the Eastern Cape. But we did everything with style. We made everything look beautiful, because that's one thing I had learned. You make a feast for the eyes before you make a feast for the stomach. And so our presentation was very beautiful. And we started to do really, really well. We morphed from a coffee shop to breakfast, to lunch, to dinner. We had this thing on a Sunday called Slow Sundays at the Ibis, where we'd do a 5-course meal starting at 12 and finishing at 4 in the afternoon. And people would come from miles around, and we would do slow roast karoo, oxtail, 6-hour oxtail, lamb neck curry. And we became quite famous, and we became an institution. We also then decided to expand and become a guest house. And we had 3 bedrooms. You can see the South American influence in this one, the karoo room and the moray room. Once again, within a year, we were fully booked just about every single weekend and every holiday. And the reason I think we did so well is I just spent a year traveling. And so I knew every single thing you needed in a guest house to make it comfortable. I'm just going to share with you some of the reviews. This one is, we are still talking about the quality of the food and the friendly service. Thank you, Terry, for the unbelievable hospitality. Not often found, but at your Ibis Lounge, everything exceeded expectations. This one, the best oats I've had in a long time. And there's simply nothing missing. Definitely one of the best guest house rooms I've ever experienced in South Africa. We did really well, and I'm convinced it's because we had just traveled. And our philosophy, once again, was you come as a guest and you leave as a friend, because we would spend time, because I wasn't traveling, I could travel through people who were coming to travel to us. And we won award after award, the TripAdvisor's Certificate of Excellence every year. The Booking.com, we got 10 out of 10, Lekker Slaap, Sleeping Out, TripAdvisor, Accommodation Direct. But the award that makes me the most excited was the Sanlam Top Destination Award. This was a countrywide award, and we came second in the whole country in the bed and breakfast category. This dusty, tiny 3-bedroom little guest house competed against every bed and breakfast in the country. And that brings me to the end of my trip. But what did those years of travel teach me? The first thing is, don't be afraid to try new things. Life changes. Either you can change or life will change. And I think COVID has shown us this. All those things we wish we had done and now we can't do, we must do the stuff that's going to make us happy. I also learned to travel lightly through life, not just my luggage, but emotionally, spiritually, financially. I've got a much lighter touch on the world. I realized how little stuff I need to make me happy. And my focus is on my friends, my family, my community, because that's where your joy comes from. In COVID, the fact that you have a beautiful vase in your lounge doesn't bring you any happiness. The fact that you've got 16 people phoning you every day brings you happiness. And I learned over and over and over again is that experience brings much more lasting happiness than things ever will. I can remember going up that glacier hiking, but I can't remember the t-shirt I bought on the equator. Things just have no value, but the things you do, well, you can go back and remember those things absolutely forever. So build memories, don't build collections of stuff. And growing up, and even until I turned 50, I would have so much fear of loss. I worked in corporate and I was scared of losing my job, losing my house. But in the process of giving up everything, I broke that bondage of fear and I have reaped enormous benefits. So I say to you, use your fear. You'll be amazed at what you can do in your life. And I promise you, on your deathbed, you won't wish you'd spend more time in the office. You'd wish you'd spend more time with your family or doing stuff. And with travel, experience, and age, I find I'm less driven by financial things and more motivated by intangible rewards. So I start to believe in forgiveness rather than division. I believe in kindness rather than greed. I believe in cooperation rather than competition. And to end, using the words of Mary Oliver, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you.